A photographer captures a heartbreaking moment as a lion on the brink of death attempts to attack him. What happens next is utterly heartbreaking. The golden grass of the Serengeti parts like water as an emaciated lion lurches forward, its desperate roar shattering the midday silence. Wildlife photographer Michael Thorne feels his blood freeze as the predator's gaze locks with his own, those amber eyes clouded with what he would later call the fog of impending death. The beast's rib cage protrudes painfully through its dull, patchy coat. Each labored breath visibly taxes what little strength remains in its once powerful frame. This isn't the majestic King Thorne traveled halfway around the world to document. This is a ghost, a walking skeleton, a creature clinging to the last threads of its life. In that moment, I knew I was watching the final act of a tragedy, Thorne would later recount. But I had no idea I was about to become part of the story. At 43, Thorne had built his reputation on capturing the raw, unfiltered truth of wildlife conservation across 5 continents. His photos of poached elephants in Kenya won him a Pulitzer. His documentary series on rhino sanctuaries was picked up by National Geographic. But nothing in his 20 years of field experience prepared him for this encounter in Tanzania's remote northeastern corridor, an area rarely visited by tourists, accessible only by bush plane or a grueling 2-day drive. The assignment had seemed straightforward: document the impact of the region's worst drought in 40 years on predator-prey dynamics. The Tanzanian Wildlife Authority granted him rare access, hoping his work might draw international attention to the unfolding ecological crisis. 3 weeks in, Thorne had captured stark imagery: desiccated watering holes, wildebeest carcasses, vultures circling beneath an unforgiving sun. But nothing like this. The male lion, estimated by guides to be around 8 years old, had been spotted earlier that week by a research team. They noted its concerning condition but adhered to the preserve's strict non-intervention policy. Nature, harsh as it might be, was to take its course. But now, as Thorne stands barely 30 feet from the staggering predator, that philosophical stance feels academic, detached from the visceral reality before him. Through his telephoto lens, he'd been tracking the lion's laborious movement for nearly an hour, documenting what he assumed were its final moments. Then, inexplicably, the dying animal catches his scent and alters course, summoning whatever scraps of strength remain to mount what appears to be an attack. It wasn't really an attack, Thorne would later clarify. It was more like a reach. Like someone drowning, grasping for anything that might save them. Thorne's Maasai guide, Lanana, had already retreated to their Land Rover, urgently calling for Thorne to do the same. Protocol was clear: never approach a wild lion, especially not one in distress. But something in the animal's desperate advance stops Thorne from running. The lion's movements aren't those of a calculating predator. There's no stealth, no precision, just raw desperation. As a former veterinary assistant, Thorne can read the signs: severe dehydration, malnutrition, possible infection. And something else, an unusual swelling around the left hind leg. The lion isn't just starving. It's injured and unable to hunt. Later, we learned he'd been gored by a buffalo about 2 weeks earlier, Thorne explained. The wound became infected. He'd been driven from his pride. He was essentially waiting to die. But in that critical moment, as the lion stumbles forward with jaws agape, Thorne makes a decision that will eventually cost him his permit, nearly end his career, and change both his life and our understanding of human-wildlife interactions. Instead of retreating, he slowly lowers his camera, keeping his eyes locked on the approaching lion. Then, deliberately, he reaches into his pack. Behind him, Lanana is shouting in both Ma and English, his voice sharp with fear and disbelief. The lion, now just 20 feet away, sways on its feet, its roar diminishing to a hoarse, rattling growl. Thorne's hand emerges from his pack, holding not a weapon, but a collapsible water bowl and his canteen. Everything I'd been taught told me to back away slowly, Thorne recounted. 20 years in the field told me this was suicidal. But sometimes you have to listen to something deeper than training. The creature before me wasn't a predator anymore. It was simply suffering. And I couldn't turn away from that. As Thorne kneels to pour water into the bowl, the lion stops its advance, swaying unsteadily on weakened legs. For 23 excruciating seconds, captured on the GoPro attached to Thorn's vest, neither moves. The only sounds are Lanana's continued warnings and the harsh, labored breathing of the dying predator. I placed the bull on the ground and backed up 5 steps, Thorn recalled. I remember thinking how absurd it was. Like offering tea to a hurricane. The lion's reaction defies expectations, too. Rather than lunging forward or retreating in fear, it stares at the water, then at Thorn. Its eyes are glazed with exhaustion and confusion. Then, with a groan that seems to rise from its very core, the massive cat collapses onto its side, just feet from the offered water. I thought that was it, Thorn said. That I'd just witnessed its last moment. But then I saw its rib cage still moving. It was alive. Just too weak to stand. What happens next would be scrutinized by wildlife biologists, conservation experts, and animal behaviorists for years to come. After radioing Lanana to bring their emergency medical kit, carried against regulations, but standard for Thorn's expeditions, the photographer cautiously approaches the fallen lion. Using a long-handled ladle, he manages to pour small amounts of water directly into the corner of the lion's mouth. The first few dribbles just ran out, he noted. But then I saw its tongue move slightly. And it began to swallow. By the time park rangers arrive, summoned by Lanana's radio call, Thorn has been administering water for nearly 40 minutes. The head ranger, Joseph McComb, a 27-year veteran, initially orders Thorn to step away immediately. He was furious, Thorn remembered. And rightfully so. I was breaking every protocol. But when Thorn shows him the infection on the lion's leg, something changes in McComb's expression. McComb, who would later become an instrumental ally, explained his change of heart. In my years of service, I have seen many animals die. It is nature. But sometimes, when humans have disrupted the balance, perhaps it becomes our responsibility to intervene. This lion, we later named him Jabari, meaning brave, had not been given a fair chance. With surprising flexibility, McComb grants Thorn a conditional 24-hour permit to provide basic veterinary care under ranger supervision. What was meant to be a day-long exception turns into something far more complex when Dr. Amara Okafor, the region's only wildlife veterinarian, arrives the next morning. The infection was severe, Dr. Okafor explained. Under normal circumstances, euthanasia would have been the humane option. But given the lion's response to initial treatment and the unusual circumstances of Mr. Thorn's intervention, I recommended a more aggressive plan. That plan includes injectable antibiotics, fluid therapy, and wound cleaning, all performed with the lion under sedation in the field, as moving him would likely have proven fatal. Against all expectations, Jabari survives the night. Then another. And another. I cancelled my return flight, Thorn said. I told my agency I was extending my assignment indefinitely. Something unprecedented was happening, and I couldn't walk away. What began as an impulsive act of compassion evolves into an unauthorized rehabilitation operation, eventually drawing international attention and igniting fierce debate. Thorn's daily blog updates, initially followed by fellow photographers, begin attracting wider notice as Jabari's improbable survival captures the public imagination. By day 7, Thorn has established a makeshift camp 30 yards from where Jabari lies recovering. The lion is still too weak to move far, but shows small improvements that Dr. Okafor deems cautiously promising. The infection is responding to antibiotics. The challenge became keeping him fed, Thorn explained. An adult male lion typically consumes 15 to 25 pounds of meat daily. We couldn't sustain that indefinitely. The solution comes from an unexpected source. 3 local Maasai villages, traditionally in conflict with lions that prey on their livestock, begin delivering animal carcasses, mostly goats that had died naturally, to support the effort. That was the moment I realized this had become something larger than just saving one lion, Thorn reflected. The local communities were investing in his survival. People who had legitimate reasons to fear and resent lions were choosing compassion instead. By the end of the second week, international media picks up the story. Headlines range from celebratory, "The Lion Whisperer, Photographer's Daring Rescue Defies Belief," to critical, "Conservation Gone Wrong, the Dangerous Precedent of the Tanzania Lion Intervention." As the debate rages, Jabari's recovery continues to defy expectations. By the fourth week, the once skeletal lion has gained enough strength to stand and walk short distances. His matted coat begins to regain its luster. The resilience of nature when given even the slightest chance is remarkable, Dr. Okafor notes. What we're witnessing isn't just physical healing, but perhaps something more profound. By this point, Thorne's original assignment is completely abandoned. His agency, initially frustrated, pivots to embrace the unfolding story. The Tanzanian Tourism Board begins discussions about developing a formal wildlife rehabilitation center, using Jabari's story as its founding narrative. But as the lion's strength returns, a new challenge emerges: what happens when Jabari fully recovers? The goal was always to return him to the wild, Thorne insists. Anything else would diminish what we've been working toward. Jabari deserves his freedom. The breakthrough comes in the 6th week. Thorne notices a subtle but significant change in the lion's behavior. Rather than merely tolerating Thorne's presence, Jabari begins to actively acknowledge him, not with aggression, but with what experts would later call non-predatory recognition. "He would track me with his eyes," Thorne recalled. "Not like prey, but like he was keeping tabs on me. Then one evening, he got up, walked directly toward me, and just laid down closer to where I was sitting. Like he was choosing to be near me." Dr. Okafor describes it as a circumstantial bond, a unique form of trust born from vulnerability and consistent positive interaction. As Jabari's strength fully returns, the team begins reducing human contact. Game cameras capture his first solo hunt, a young warthog in the 7th week, a critical milestone. Yet remarkably, even as his hunting instincts resurface, his unusual relationship with Thorne remains. "We don't have a framework for this kind of relationship in wildlife management," explains Dr. Kareem Bale, a predator behavior expert who observed the case. "It defies our traditional understanding. What we're seeing isn't taming. It's something else entirely. Something akin to mutual recognition across species boundaries." By the 3rd month, Jabari is regularly hunting independently and patrolling a territory miles from the original site. Yet consistently, he returns to the vicinity of Thorne's camp every few days. "I never feed him anymore," Thorne explains. "I never approach him directly. But several times a week, usually around sunset, he appears. We exist in the same space, aware of each other, neither threatening nor threatened. It's the most profound connection I've ever experienced." The story reaches its emotional crescendo when Thorne's permit finally expires after nearly 4 months in the field. His final evening is documented by a film crew. As Thorne packs, Jabari appears at his usual spot at the edge of the camp. For nearly 3 hours, the lion remains, always keeping Thorne within sight. When the photographer finally zips his last bag closed, he sits down facing Jabari about 20 yards away. "Thank you," Thorne says simply, his voice catching. "Live well, my friend." Whether by coincidence or understanding, Jabari rises at that moment, looks directly at Thorne for several long seconds, then turns and walks away into the gathering darkness of the savannah. 6 months after Thorne's departure, Jabari is confirmed to have joined a small pride in the reserve. Ranger reports indicate he is healthy, successfully hunting, and integrated into the social structure. GPS tracking shows that while his territory now extends far away, he occasionally returns to the area where Thorne's camp once stood. "People ask if we were friends," Thorne reflects. "I don't know if that's the right word. What I do know is that for a brief moment in time, we transcended the boundaries that typically separate our species. We reached across a divide that has existed since prehistory and found something unexpected there. Not just survival, but connection." The Jabari Wildlife Rehabilitation Center now stands near the site of the original encounter. Funded by donations that poured in following Thorne's story, it specializes in treating injured predators with a philosophy that balances intervention with respect for wild nature. Michael Thorne serves on its advisory board and returns to Tanzania twice yearly.